All right, welcome back everybody. In this short video, we're going to be looking at the first paper that's due for this class. This certainly won't be as detailed as some of the other lectures that we've had so far, but my hope is that by having sort of time committed to this particular topic, everybody will be a lot clearer on the requirements for this paper, and there won't be as much confusion as there sometimes is when it comes to how to address this first paper and what's required in it. That being said, if you finish this video and still have lots of questions about what's expected or how to do something, I encourage you to bring those with you to our class, our meeting that's dedicated to covering this and reviewing for the first exam, so we can make sure that not only that I can provide you with clarification on things, but also the rest of the class, where many people probably have those exact same questions. So what is this learning paper all about? The learning paper is not necessarily about you learning something new. Well, it sort of is, but it's more about you diving into what psychologists focus on when they've studied learning over the last century or so. This area of research or kind of interest that we call behaviorism. What you're going to be doing in this paper is exploring a lot of the concepts and terms that we've been discussing in the behaviorism section and find a way to apply those to your own life. In particular, you're going to think of a bad habit that you've developed and try to understand it and potentially remove it through behavioral concepts. The first portion asks that you just assess where these bad behaviors, and they have to be behaviors, are coming from. Most people choose things like biting their hair, or chewing their nails, or sleeping in too late, things that are easily quantifiable, especially stuff that's done on a semi-regular basis, maybe 5-10 times a day or more. Those are the things that I encourage you to try to use. I'd love to see more than 20 papers about biting nails. I know people love to do that, but anything outside of that is strongly encouraged. But if you can find a behavior that you display, again, what I want you to first do is try to figure out the source of this through the behavioral concepts that we've been discussing. Namely, you want to assess, is this a byproduct of operant conditioning or classical conditioning? Is there specific components around those concepts of operant or classical conditioning, like generalization and discrimination and other things that are potential sources of it? I really want you to provide a very full-bodied description of where these behavioral issues are coming from. And again, you want to make sure that you're focusing on the behavioral aspects of it. Don't talk about emotions and thoughts and other things that are probably players in these behaviors, but they don't fit within the scope of behavioral psychology. Once you've figured out where this is coming from, or at least given a good argument for where these behaviors are coming from, your next step along the way is to enact a plan that can help you reduce or remove that behavior. You're going to, once you've come up with this plan and described it, again in behavioral concepts, find a way to chart out how this plan worked. Now, the plan dictates the chart. So I'd love to provide you with a perfect chart that explains exactly what's going to happen, but each plan might require a different chart. Some charts could just focus on the frequency of a behavior that occurred. Some could focus on the specific types of punishments or curbing of behaviors that you're going to be doing to try to get rid of this behavior. But in the end, what I want to see you do is find a plan that works, find a way to quantify it, put it on a chart, and assess whether or not it's working as you try it out for 4 days. Now, obviously, this means you need to start this paper fairly far in advance. If you try to do this the day before, it's pretty tough to enact a plan for 4 days. And mind you, I understand that many people can make up nonsense and try to create a chart that sort of looks like they did something for 4 days, but that sort of defeats the purpose of this paper, which is kind of a bummer because I'm guessing almost all of us have these behaviors, these quirks that we'd like to do away with, and this is actually an amazing opportunity to get yourself started on that path. So I encourage you, think of a plan, think of how you can use behavioral principles, describe those behavioral principles, and then chart out how that plan worked. After that, you need to assess the efficacy of that plan. I again want to see this described in behavioral terms. I know many of you will be tempted at many points to transition away from treating this like a behavioral paper and start talking about motivation and emotions and all of these other things that make behavior squeamish. Please do your best to resist that. The big important thing I want you to get from this paper is not only that you can find a way to help with your behavioral issues or your problems that you wanted to kind of fix, but I also want you to really learn how to write a paper through a specific lens. And the behavioral lens, even though I'm sure there's lots of us that aren't necessarily fully embracing it as we're going through this, is a really good lens to start with because it is very absolute versus some of the other lenses that we'll look at in future sections down the road. Again, just in case I haven't been clear on some of the things I've talked about, just remember this paper does need to avoid the mention of thoughts and emotions and other things that are probably key players in the development of behaviors and the removal of them. But I want you to try to be able to speak about this topic through the dialogue that behaviorists use. You do want to, again, get yourself ready to go on this so you have a full 4 days to enact a plan that you've come up with. And remember, that plan has to be based on behavioral principles. If you are struggling with things and just kind of guessing at what caused something and how to remove it, go back to the drawing board. I know many students, when they get into this, sort of assume that we can explain everything through operant or classical conditioning or some other law that we've come up with, but that's not how behaviorism works. It's a very precise formula, just as you really shouldn't be using different mathematical formulas for trying to solve different problems when they don't work. The same thing applies when it comes to behaviorism. Classical conditioning does not fit every single thing that you do. There's lots of things that cannot be explained through that particular model. Same thing with operant conditioning. There's limitations to both major types of learning that we've discussed in this class. And it's your job as a student to correctly identify which type of conditioning, which type of learning applies to both the development of your behavior and the removal of your behavior. There are wrong answers, and that's something that is going to be a critical component to your grade if you correctly or incorrectly link something up to a type of learning. The other thing that's really critical for this paper is that not only do you go into the details of it, but you give yourself enough time at the end to write a very clear paper. And I've had numerous students in past semesters work on this paper, come up with beautiful plans, really assess things, and then run out of time, so they rush an entire section or even rush the entire paper because they're waiting until the last minute or last couple hours to try to write this paper. This paper is going to take time, and if you give yourself enough of it, you can be very clear in your writing and maybe even learn more about behaviorism through the process. If you take too long to do the tests, or if you just take too long to start, things get messy. Things get really complicated because oftentimes not only do you struggle to explain things because you haven't had time to process it, but your writing comes across as muddled, and you will lose points if you look at the rubric on your grade if that's the case. If you're wondering about the breakdown of the points, this is actually listed on the rubric as well. But you're going to essentially get for this paper, I believe it's 25 points for the paper as a whole. And in it, most of the points you'll see are about using the concepts and the terms correctly. So your description of the behavior through behavioral concepts, your description of how it was formed, those things add up to 5 total points. And then a description of your plan, a chart that really attempts to show me some way of you quantifying the efficacy of your attempt or the lack of efficacy of your attempt, whichever one works. You're not going to get docked points because your plan, even though it was well thought out, didn't work. I just want to see some type of chart. And then again, the last couple components are kind of the assessment section. There will be overarching points that I'm going to be using to kind of gauge the quality of these papers as well. 10 total points are for the kind of use and incorporation of a multitude of different concepts throughout the paper, and also grammar. So half of that 10 points is just, did you cover a lot? Because I have had students in the past that have just literally used the same two terms over and over and over again throughout the paper and never gone into anything else. It's not okay. I am not saying that you need to incorporate things that don't fit into your paper, but we talked about a lot of components linked to behaviorism, regardless of which type of learning you're looking at, in the class, and I want to see those incorporated into your paper. Same thing with the grammar and the writing. Just writing a few clear sentences is good, but I want to make sure that you've got a full paper with nice transitions, very clear statements throughout to get those other 5 points. Again, in total, that adds up to 25 points. If you have questions about this, again, please raise them during our section meeting because I want to make sure that everybody's clear on that. All right. Some other house cleaning specifics. These are due at exactly 11 p.m. on the 5th of October. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to turn them in at exactly 11 p.m. on the 5th of October. You can turn them in days or even weeks early if you're up for that. And they do have to be posted on the class site. Now, you want to make sure that those are uploaded correctly because not only is that the way I'm accessing them, but those do run through a plagiarism checker, and you want to make sure that they are capable of being run through the plagiarism checker. So that means no shares of Google Drive files, no URL links to your papers, no corrupted files that can't be accessed by Blackboard. You have to make sure that it got up there correctly. And this usually means just looking at it and seeing that the file, the PDF or the doc or whatever format you used file is successfully viewable on that website once it's uploaded. Anything that's turned in late, even a couple seconds late, is going to receive a 25% deduction. And I'm going to be very firm on this. I know many of you will have computer issues. I know many of you will have conversion issues. This is why you want to get this completed early. Don't wait until the last minute. Don't risk a bad internet connection or a roommate that comes in and starts yelling something, or a family member that does something that logs you off, or a computer that crashes. Don't wait and have that thing have a huge impact on your grade. You don't want to lose almost 10 points on this simply because of those issues. So try to get this done early. Avoid that late deduction, but if you do find yourself in a place where you're not close to complete, don't turn in something that's miserable. Just take the deduction and make sure you write a really good paper with that deduction in mind. I'm not sure what else to cover on this, but if there are questions about this format or all of these other things, again, please ask them in our meeting.